The winter of 1887 descended upon Vienna like a jealous lover, clutching the city in a frigid embrace that left frost patterns on windowpanes resembling delicate lace. Inside the Imperial Hofburg Palace, however, the air remained warm, perfumed with beeswax candles and the subtle scent of pine brought in for the coming Christmas celebrations. Julia Lamont stood rigidly before Emperor Franz Joseph, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened beneath her gloves. The palace walls seemed to close in around her as she awaited his judgment on her petition, a humble request to establish a small school for the children of wounded veterans in the outskirts of Vienna. "Miss Lamont," the emperor said, stroking his whiskers with age-spotted fingers, "while your concern for our veterans is noted, I find your proposal lacks merit. The empire cannot dedicate resources to every bleeding heart with grand ideas of charity." Julia forced her gaze to remain steady, though her chest constricted painfully. 6 months of preparation, countless sleepless nights drafting and redrafting her proposal, all dismissed with casual indifference. "Your Majesty," she began, her English accent pronounced against the German and Hungarian tones that dominated the court, "these are children of men who sacrificed." The emperor raised his hand, silencing her. "I've made my decision. Your sentiments are worthless without practical consideration of imperial priorities." He turned to his aide. "Next petitioner." As she backed away, performing the requisite curtsy despite her trembling knees, Julia caught a pair of dark eyes watching her from the emperor's right side. Sebastian Moreau, the half-French, half-Austrian advisor whose reputation for brilliance was matched only by whispers of his unswerving loyalty to the crown. His expression revealed nothing as she passed, yet she felt the weight of his assessment like a physical touch. In the grand corridor outside the audience chamber, Julia pressed her forehead against the cold marble of a window embrasure, struggling to compose herself before facing the journey back to her modest lodgings. "Miss Lamont." The deep voice startled her. Sebastian Moreau stood several paces away, tall and austere in his formal court attire. At 43, he carried the gravitas of his position in every deliberate movement, in the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. "Herr Moreau," she acknowledged, straightening immediately. "I apologize if my disappointment was unduly displayed." "On the contrary," he replied, his German accented with the faintest touch of French, "your composure was admirable." He glanced down the corridor before continuing. "I've read your proposal." It was considerably more nuanced than His Majesty suggested. Julia blinked in surprise. "You've read it?" "It is my duty to be informed on matters brought before the Emperor." He paused. "May I ask what brings an Englishwoman to champion Austrian veterans?" The question carried no accusation, only genuine curiosity. Julia hesitated. Her reasons were personal, too personal for a first meeting with a man whose influence could destroy what little standing she had in Vienna. "My late father was a military physician," she offered. "I grew up understanding that a soldier's sacrifice extends to his family. The empire honors its fallen, but sometimes forgets those who return broken." Sebastian studied her with an intensity that made her wonder if he could see beyond her carefully constructed answers. "Walk with me, Miss Lamont. The Heldenplatz offers a fine view this time of day." It wasn't a request she could refuse from the emperor's advisor, though venturing into the public eye with such a prominent court figure would certainly invite gossip. Still, Julia followed, retrieving her heavy wool cloak from an attendant. Outside, the winter air bit at her cheeks as they walked in silence through the Heroes' Square. Sebastian finally spoke as they passed the equestrian statue of Archduke Charles. "Your proposal was rejected not for lack of merit, but because it originated from you, an outsider with no significant connections within the empire." "I've lived in Vienna for 3 years," Julia replied, unable to keep a note of bitterness from her voice. "I speak German fluently." You misunderstand," Sebastian interrupted gently. "It isn't a matter of your adaptation but of your origins. The emperor is particularly sensitive to foreign influences after recent political challenges." They stopped at the edge of the square, the sprawling imperial garden stretching before them under a blanket of snow. Julia tightened her cloak against a sudden gust of wind. "Then why tell me this, Herr Moreau?" "To soften the blow of rejection." A faint smile touched his lips. "I tell you because your idea deserves implementation. The children of our wounded veterans deserve better than institutional neglect. He produced a small leather portfolio from inside his coat. I've taken the liberty of drafting an alternative approach. Julia accepted the portfolio with numb fingers, stunned by this unexpected turn. I don't understand. The proposal will be resubmitted through the Empress Elizabeth's Charitable Foundation, with certain modifications. Your involvement will be as a contracted teacher rather than founder, at least initially. But why would you do this? She asked, searching his face for hidden motives. Sebastian's expression remained impassive, but something in his eyes softened. Because sometimes worth is measured not in titles or origins, but in the persistent pursuit of what is right. He glanced at the palace clock tower. I must return. Review the documents and send word to my office if you find the arrangement acceptable. With that, he bowed slightly and turned back toward the palace, leaving Julia clutching the portfolio like a lifeline as snowflakes began to drift down from the leaden sky. 3 weeks passed before Julia received a summons to the offices of the imperial administration. The winter had grown harsher, and she arrived with cheeks flushed from the biting cold, snowflakes melting in her dark hair as she was escorted through the labyrinthine corridors of the Hofburg's administrative wing. Sebastian rose from behind his desk as she entered, gesturing to a chair opposite him. Thank you for coming, Miss Lamont. I trust the weather didn't make your journey too arduous. Nothing a true English constitution can't withstand, she replied with a small smile, removing her gloves. He nodded, appreciating her attempt at levity. I've received approval for the modified proposal. The Empress's Foundation will provide initial funding, and the Ministry of War has allocated a small building near the Veterans Hospital in Hietzing. Julia's heart leapt. Truly? When might we begin? Spring would be practical for renovations, Sebastian said, sliding a document across the desk. This outlines your appointment as head teacher, with a modest salary and accommodation on the premises. She scanned the document, hardly daring to believe that her vision might actually materialize. This is more generous than I anticipated. The Empress was particularly moved by the provision for music instruction. She believes, as you stated in your original proposal, that artistic expression can be healing for children who've experienced trauma. Julia looked up sharply. You showed my proposal to the Empress. A slight flush colored Sebastian's cheeks, so brief she might have imagined it. I took the liberty of sharing certain passages that I found particularly compelling. An unexpected warmth bloomed in Julia's chest. Thank you, Herr Moreau. Truly. He dismissed her gratitude with a small gesture. Your ideas earned this opportunity, Miss Lamont. I merely removed certain obstacles. As she signed the necessary documents, Julia noticed a book of English poetry partially hidden beneath official papers on his desk, Tennyson's In Memoriam. Sebastian followed her gaze and moved some papers to cover it more completely. You read English poetry? She asked, curiosity overcoming propriety. A personal indulgence, he replied, his tone suggesting the topic was closed. Now, regarding the curriculum requirements. The meeting continued for another hour as they discussed practical matters, but Julia couldn't help wondering about this enigmatic man who read Tennyson in private and championed her cause in public. What layers existed beneath his carefully maintained facade of imperial efficiency? As she prepared to leave, Sebastian handed her a sealed envelope. The first installment of funds for supplies and initial preparations. I would appreciate monthly reports on your progress. Of course, she agreed, accepting the envelope. Will these reports go directly to you or to the Foundation administrators? To me, he said, then added more hesitantly, I have a personal interest in seeing this project succeed. Their fingers brushed momentarily during the exchange, a fleeting contact that nonetheless sent a curious sensation through Julia's hand. Sebastian withdrew almost immediately, his professional demeanor firmly back in place. Good day, Miss Lamont. I look forward to your first report. Outside, as her carriage navigated the snowy streets, Julia found herself contemplating that brief moment of connection. The man was an intriguing contradiction, coldly efficient yet quietly passionate about helping children he'd never met. She wondered what experiences had shaped him, what stories lay behind those dark eyes that seemed to see far more than they revealed. Little did she know that Sebastian Moreau stood at his office window long after her departure, watching her carriage disappear into the swirling snow, a folded letter from his late brother, a cavalry officer who had died of wounds sustained in the Austro-Prussian War, pressed between his fingers like a talisman. By April, the snows had receded, and Vienna bloomed with new life. The small schoolhouse in Hietzing underwent transformation under Julia's determined supervision. Worn floors were sanded and polished, cracked windows replaced, and walls freshly painted in cheerful colors. Each milestone was carefully documented in her monthly reports to Sebastian, which grew increasingly detailed as the project progressed. Sebastian's responses began as formal acknowledgments but gradually evolved into thoughtful commentaries and occasional suggestions. By the third exchange, their correspondence had developed a rhythm of its own, professional on the surface but with undercurrents of growing mutual respect. On a mild spring afternoon, as Julia directed the placement of desks in what would become the main classroom, the unexpected sound of a carriage arriving drew her attention. Through the open window, she watched Sebastian descend, immaculate as always in a charcoal suit that emphasized his lean frame. Herr Moreau, she greeted him at the door, suddenly conscious of her practical work dress and hair loosened from its usual neat arrangement. We weren't expecting an inspection today. Not an inspection, he corrected, removing his hat. I wanted to see the progress firsthand. Your reports are thorough, but there's value in direct observation. As Julia guided him through the renovated spaces, she found herself watching his reactions closely, the way his eyes lingered on the children's artwork she'd already hung, how his fingers traced the spines of donated books arranged on newly built shelves. You've accomplished a great deal with limited resources, he observed as they entered what would become a small music room, currently occupied only by a donated piano badly in need of tuning. We've been fortunate in donations, Julia replied. Though we're still lacking in musical instruments. Sebastian approached the piano, pressing a discordant key. I learned on an instrument similar to this as a boy. My mother insisted, though my father considered it an impractical use of time. It was the first personal detail he'd ever shared with her. Julia seized the opportunity to learn more about this enigmatic man. Did you continue playing into adulthood? A shadow crossed his face. No. Military academy left little time for such pursuits. He changed the subject abruptly. How many students have registered thus far? 17, with several more families expressing interest. She hesitated before adding, some are reluctant, fearing their children will be treated as objects of charity. Sebastian nodded. Pride can be a formidable barrier, especially for men who once stood tall in uniform. His gaze drifted to the window, where the veterans' hospital was visible in the distance. They fear pity more than pain. The insight revealed an understanding that surprised her. You speak as though from experience, Herr Moreau. He turned back to her, his expression carefully neutral once more. I observe human nature, Miss Lamont. It's essential in my position. He consulted his pocket watch. I've taken enough of your time. I should return to the palace. As they walked to his waiting carriage, Sebastian paused. There's a matter I've been meaning to discuss. The school will need an official opening ceremony to garner continued support. The Empress has expressed interest in attending. Julia stopped short. Her Imperial Majesty? Here? A brief appearance only, but her presence would ensure the project receives proper attention and ongoing patronage. He studied her reaction. Does that prospect concern you? It's an honor, certainly, but... She struggled to articulate her misgivings. I worry about the Emperor's reaction. He made his opinion of me quite clear. Sebastian's expression softened almost imperceptibly. The Emperor respects results, Miss Lamont. When he sees what you've accomplished, his initial judgment may alter. He hesitated before adding, and you would not face him alone. I would be present to highlight the administrative successes. The simple assurance of his support should not have affected her as strongly as it did, yet Julia found herself touched by his quiet confidence. Then I accept with gratitude. As Sebastian prepared to depart, he reached into his coat and withdrew a slim package wrapped in brown paper. A small contribution to your music room. Nothing elaborate, I'm afraid. Julia unwrapped it to find a collection of simple sheet music, folk songs and children's tunes arranged for beginner pianists. The thoughtfulness of the gift, so perfectly aligned with the school's needs, left her momentarily speechless. This is most considerate, Herr Moreau. Sebastian, he said quietly. When we are not in official proceedings, I would be honored if you used my given name. The invitation to such informality between them hung in the air like delicate crystal, beautiful but easily shattered by the slightest misstep. Then you must call me Julia, she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. He nodded once, the barest smile touching his lips before he donned his hat. Until the ceremony, Julia. As his carriage pulled away, she remained on the steps clutching the music to her chest, wondering at the curious lightness she felt despite the daunting prospect of an imperial visit. The afternoon sun caught a glimpse of Sebastian's profile through the carriage window before he disappeared around a corner, stern as always, yet somehow changed in her perception. What neither realized was that their brief encounter had been observed by Friedrich Weber, an ambitious young court secretary with close ties to the emperor's conservative military advisors, men who viewed Sebastian's interest in an English commoner's project with deep suspicion. The day of the opening ceremony arrived with perfect May weather, as though Vienna itself approved of the small school's ambitious mission. Flags bearing the imperial double-headed eagle hung alongside simpler decorations crafted by local children. The building, once neglected, now stood proud with freshly painted shutters and flower boxes blooming beneath each window. Julia had risen before dawn, too anxious for sleep, reviewing every detail until she could recite the day's schedule from memory. She wore her finest dress, navy blue with modest lace at the collar and cuffs, the most appropriate attire she could afford for meeting royalty. Sebastian arrived an hour before the ceremony, directing the imperial guards and ceremonial staff with quiet efficiency. When he finally approached her, his formal court uniform lent him an even more imposing presence, though his eyes softened as they met hers. "The arrangements are excellent," he said by way of greeting. "Are you prepared for your presentation?" "As prepared as possible," Julia admitted. "Though I confess to some nervousness." "Understandable." He glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard before continuing in a lower voice. "There has been a change in the attendance list. The Emperor has decided to accompany the Empress." Julia felt the blood drain from her face. "His Majesty is coming? But why?" He made his disinterest quite clear. "Politics," Sebastian replied grimly. "Certain factions at court have suggested the Empress is being manipulated into supporting foreign interests. The Emperor comes to demonstrate his control over imperial patronage." "Foreign interests? It's a school for Austrian children." With an English headmistress, he reminded her gently. "In some circles, that is enough to inspire suspicion." Julia's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her cuffs. "What should I do differently?" "Nothing," Sebastian said firmly. "Speak honestly about the children and their needs. The Emperor may have rejected your petition, but he is not immune to genuine good work when presented with evidence." His hand moved as if to touch her arm reassuringly, but he checked the gesture before completing it. "Trust in what you've built here." The exchange was interrupted by the arrival of the first guests, veterans and their families, local officials, and representatives from various charitable organizations. Sebastian was called away to oversee final security arrangements, leaving Julia to greet the early arrivals with a smile that belied her inner turmoil. As the appointed hour approached, the assembled crowd grew hushed with anticipation. The imperial couple arrived with the expected pomp, the Empress Elizabeth, still beautiful despite the sorrows that had marked her life, and Emperor Franz Joseph, stern and martial in his military uniform adorned with decorations. Julia curtsied deeply as protocol demanded, feeling the Emperor's critical gaze upon her. When she rose, she was surprised to see the Empress step forward with genuine warmth in her expression. "Miss Lamont," Elizabeth said in her lightly accented English, "I have looked forward to seeing this school. Herr Moreau speaks most highly of your dedication." "You honor us with your presence, your Imperial Majesty," Julia replied, keenly aware of Sebastian standing at attention nearby, his expression carefully neutral. The emperor offered a curt nod but no words of greeting. As Julia guided the imperial party through the school, explaining each aspect of the program they developed, she could feel his skepticism like a physical weight. The empress, by contrast, showed genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about the children's needs and the teaching methods to be employed. In the music room, Elizabeth paused before the now-tuned piano. "I understand music features prominently in your curriculum, Miss Lamont." "Yes, Your Majesty. We believe it offers both discipline and expression for children who have experienced difficult circumstances." The emperor made a dismissive sound. "A luxury, surely, when basic education would serve them better." Before Julia could respond, Sebastian stepped forward. "If I may, Your Majesty, research from the university suggests that musical training enhances mathematical ability and memory. These children will receive practical education enhanced by artistic disciplines." The emperor's eyebrows rose slightly at his advisor's unexpected advocacy. "You seem unusually invested in these teaching philosophies, Moreau." "I am invested in efficient use of imperial resources, sire," Sebastian replied smoothly. "This program represents an excellent return on modest investment, creating productive citizens from children who might otherwise become burdens to the state." Julia recognized his strategy, framing her passionate project in the practical terms the emperor valued. She caught Sebastian's eye briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The ceremony proceeded to the courtyard, where chairs had been arranged for a small musical presentation by children from a nearby orphanage who would soon attend the school. As the simple folk melodies filled the air, Julia noticed the empress discreetly wiping away a tear, while even the emperor's stern countenance softened marginally. When time came for Julia's speech, she abandoned her carefully prepared remarks. Instead, she spoke from the heart about the children, not as objects of charity but as the empire's future, deserving of every opportunity to overcome their circumstances. As she concluded, she found herself looking not at the imperial couple but at Sebastian, whose quiet pride in her accomplishment was evident only in the slight curve of his lips and the warmth in his dark eyes. The emperor's response, when it came, was brief but significant. "Your commitment is noted, Miss Lamont. Perhaps I judged prematurely regarding the practical application of your compassion." It was as close to an apology as an emperor ever came. Julia curtsied again, murmuring appropriate thanks while her heart soared at this partial victory. As the imperial party prepared to depart, the empress paused to speak privately with Julia. "Continue your excellent work, Miss Lamont. The empire needs more such initiatives." Her perceptive gaze shifted briefly toward Sebastian before returning to Julia with a knowing smile. "And more such dedicated partners in worthy causes." The implication in her words sent color rising to Julia's cheeks. "Herr Moreau has been instrumental in the school's creation, Your Majesty. I am deeply grateful for his support." "Yes," the empress said softly. "I believe you are. As is he, for finding purpose beyond the endless politics of court." Before Julia could respond to this startling observation, the imperial couple departed in a flurry of ceremony, leaving her to wonder at the empress's insight into a connection she herself was only beginning to understand. The remaining guests gradually dispersed, until only Sebastian remained, standing in the empty courtyard as afternoon shadows lengthened across the cobblestones. "You were magnificent," he said simply when they were finally alone. "I spoke from the heart," Julia replied. "Sometimes that's all one can do. Sometimes it's the only thing that matters." His voice carried an emotion she hadn't heard before. "Julia, whatever he intended to say was interrupted by the arrival of a palace messenger, breathless from haste. "Herr Moreau, your immediate presence is required at the palace. There's been an incident with the Hungarian delegation." Sebastian's expression closed immediately, the imperial advisor replacing the man who had stood before her seconds earlier. "I must go." He bowed formally. "My congratulations on today's success, Miss Lamont." As he departed, Julia felt the distance between their worlds reassert itself, he to the rarefied air of imperial politics, she to her modest school and rented rooms. Yet something had shifted between them, a recognition that transcended their different stations. What neither knew was that Friedrich Weber had observed their private moment, his keen eyes noting every nuance of their interaction. That evening, he carefully composed a letter to Count Montenuovo, the emperor's most conservative advisor, detailing his concerns about undue foreign influence on the emperor's trusted confidant. The seeds of interference were sown even as Julia walked the empty schoolrooms that evening, fingers tracing the piano keys that Sebastian had once touched, her thoughts filled with possibilities neither had dared to name. Summer unfurled across Vienna like a luxurious tapestry, bringing with it the school's first term in full operation. 23 children now filled the once empty classrooms with laughter and occasional tears, their young lives slowly mending under Julia's careful guidance. Sebastian's visits became a regular occurrence, ostensibly to monitor the imperial investment, but increasingly characterized by lingering conversations in Julia's small office after official business concluded. They discovered shared passions for literature and music, debated educational philosophies, and gradually revealed fragments of their pasts to one another. On a particularly warm July afternoon, Sebastian arrived unannounced, finding Julia in the garden helping children tend the small vegetable plot they'd established. "A hands-on lesson in botany?" he inquired, looking oddly informal without his usual jacket, his shirt sleeves rolled to accommodate the summer heat. Julia smiled, brushing soil from her hands. "And patience. These children want immediate results from everything." "A universal trait of youth," he observed, then lowered his voice. "Might I speak with you privately? I've received news that concerns the school." In her office, Sebastian closed the door before speaking. "The quarterly funding review approaches. Count Montenuovo has suggested redirecting the Empress's charitable funds to military widows' pensions instead." Julia's heart sank. "Can he do that?" "The Empress herself approved our funding. Her Majesty's influence in practical matters is limited," Sebastian explained. "The Emperor listens to Montenuovo on financial matters. However," he added, producing a folder from his case, "I've prepared a detailed accounting of our expenditures and outcomes that makes a compelling case for continued support." She noted his use of "our" with a warm flutter in her chest. "You've done so much already, Sebastian. I cannot ask for more." "You didn't ask," he replied simply. "I offered." He hesitated before continuing. "There is another matter. Certain rumors have begun circulating at court regarding the nature of my interest in this project." Julia felt heat rise to her face. "What sort of rumors?" "The predictable kind when a court official visits a school more frequently than strictly necessary." His tone remained steady, but his eyes searched her face. "Some suggest I have been unduly influenced by foreign charms." "That's absurd," she protested. "Your support has always been proper and professional." A shadow of something like disappointment flickered across his features. "Yes, of course. Nevertheless, it might be prudent to conduct future business through written correspondence for a time." The suggestion felt like a stone dropping into the calm pool of understanding they'd cultivated. "If you believe that's best," Julia managed, unable to keep the hurt entirely from her voice. Sebastian moved toward the window, looking out at the children still working in the garden. "What I believe best and what is politically necessary are rarely aligned." He turned back to her, his expression softening. "Julia, please understand," a knock interrupted them. One of the teachers appeared with an urgent message: a child had fallen and required immediate attention. The moment of personal disclosure evaporated as Julia hurried to address the crisis. By the time she returned to her office, Sebastian had gone, leaving only the financial documents on her desk with a brief note: "I remain committed to our work, regardless of appearances. S." The carefully neutral wording told Julia everything about the constraints binding him. As imperial advisor, Sebastian's first loyalty must always be to the crown. Any personal feelings, if indeed he harbored them, remained secondary to duty. That evening, Julia penned a response thanking him formally for his continued administrative support, maintaining the professional distance he'd suggested. Only in the final line did she allow herself a more personal note: "The children asked after you today. They miss their piano instructor. As do I, J." What Julia couldn't know was that Sebastian read her letter alone in his study late that night, his fingers tracing her elegant handwriting as though it might somehow bridge the distance between them. Nor could she see him carefully fold the letter into the pages of his Tennyson before locking it in his personal desk drawer, away from the prying eyes of those who sought to use his growing affection as a weapon against him. August brought oppressive heat to Vienna, but the children thrived under the structured routine of the school. Julia found herself increasingly occupied with administrative duties alongside teaching, leaving little time for the melancholy that sometimes seized her in quiet moments when thoughts of Sebastian intruded. True to his word, he maintained their connection through correspondence, formal letters regarding school business, accompanied occasionally by personal notes sharing observations on books they discussed or anecdotes about palace life that might amuse her. Though proper in content, these communications sustained a tenuous thread between them that neither was willing to sever completely. On a stifling afternoon when most of Vienna's aristocracy had fled to cooler country estates, Julia was surprised by a visitor, not Sebastian, but Friedrich Weber, the young court secretary she'd met briefly at official functions. "Herr Weber," she greeted him with polite confusion. "This is unexpected." "Miss Lamont." His bow was precise, his manner coolly professional. "I come on official business regarding your school's funding." Julia's stomach tightened with apprehension as she showed him to her office. "I was under the impression Herr Moreau oversees our financial matters." "Ordinarily, yes." Weber's thin smile didn't reach his eyes. "However, Herr Moreau has been assigned additional diplomatic responsibilities that require his full attention. The Emperor has temporarily reassigned oversight of certain charitable projects." The news that Sebastian had been deliberately removed from her project struck Julia like a physical blow. "I see. And what brings you specifically to us today?" Weber placed a document on her desk. "A routine audit of expenditures. The Emperor is most interested in ensuring efficiency in all imperial patronage." As he methodically questioned her about every financial decision, Julia recognized the exercise for what it was, not routine at all, but a targeted investigation. Behind Weber's polite demeanor lay a clear purpose: finding fault. "Your music program expenses seem excessive," he noted, examining her ledgers. "Surely wounded veterans' children need practical skills more than artistic indulgences." The echo of the Emperor's original criticism was too precise to be coincidental. "Music provides both discipline and comfort," Julia replied evenly. "Many of these children have experienced trauma. Artistic expression offers healing alongside the academic rigor we maintain." "A very English perspective," Weber observed with feigned casualness. "One wonders how much of your homeland's educational philosophy has influenced an ostensibly Austrian institution." The implication was clear: she was being portrayed as a foreign influence. Julia straightened in her chair. "Our curriculum was approved by the Imperial Education Ministry and has produced excellent results. The children's progress reports speak for themselves." Weber's smile thinned further. "Indeed. Speaking of influence, Herr Moreau's personal interest in your project has been noted in certain circles. His advocacy has been most passionate." "Herr Moreau recognizes the value of education for vulnerable children," Julia replied carefully. "His support has been entirely appropriate." "Of course," Weber agreed with exaggerated politeness. "Though some find it curious how frequently he visited personally rather than sending subordinates. Quite unusual for a man of his position." The conversation continued in this vein, ostensibly about finances but laden with insinuations about Sebastian's motivations and Julia's influence. When Weber finally departed, promising to report his findings directly to Count Montenuovo, Julia was left shaken by the implicit threat to both the school and Sebastian's position. That evening, disregarding Sebastian's request for discretion, she wrote him directly: "Sebastian, forgive this breach of protocol, but circumstances compel me to warn you. Herr Weber conducted what he called a routine audit today. His question suggested an agenda beyond financial oversight. He repeatedly insinuated that my foreign influence has compromised your judgment regarding the school. I fear our work faces powerful opposition. More concerning still is the potential damage to your position. Please advise how I should proceed to protect both the school and your standing at court. With concern. Julia. The response came not by letter but in person, as Sebastian appeared at her modest apartment near midnight, still in evening attire from some court function, his expression grave. You shouldn't have written so plainly, he said without greeting as she admitted him. Letters can be intercepted. And yet you've come in person, which seems an even greater risk, she countered, leading him to her small sitting room. What's happening, Sebastian? He paced the confined space, tension evident in every movement. Weber reports directly to Montenuovo, who seeks any opportunity to undermine my influence with the Emperor. They're using the school, using you, as a means to that end. Using me? I don't understand. Sebastian stopped before her, his dark eyes intense. They suggest I've allowed personal feelings to cloud my judgment, that my support for your school stems not from its merit but from improper attachment. The implication hung in the air between them. Julia's breath caught. And is there truth to their accusation? For a moment, Sebastian's carefully maintained composure faltered. Julia, he said, her name almost a caress, if I were free to follow my heart's inclination, he broke off, shaking his head. But I am not. My position, my duty to the crown. I understand, she said softly, though her heart constricted painfully. What shall we do about the school? He gathered himself visibly, returning to practical matters. I've spoken with the Empress. She remains committed to your work but cannot oppose her husband openly. We must demonstrate the school's value so conclusively that even Montenuovo cannot dispute it. How? The Emperor visits the Veterans Hospital next month for its 10th anniversary. We must ensure your students participate in the ceremony, show him directly what his patronage has achieved. Sebastian's expression softened. Let him see what I have seen in you from the beginning. The quiet admission warmed her despite the circumstances. And until then? I must maintain my distance publicly, he said, regret evident in his voice. Any communication should go through official channels only. Julia nodded, understanding the necessity even as she chafed against it. And what of tonight? Isn't your presence here precisely the ammunition your enemies seek? Sebastian moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. Tonight was a necessary risk. I couldn't let you face this uncertainty alone. His gaze held hers for a long moment. Take care, Julia. There are those who would use your goodness against you, against us both. After he departed, Julia stood motionless in her small sitting room, the echo of his words, particularly that significant us, reverberating through her mind. Despite the danger to his position, Sebastian had risked coming to her. That choice revealed more than any declaration might have done. Outside her window, unseen in the shadows, Friedrich Weber watched Sebastian's departing figure with cold satisfaction. Tomorrow, Count Montenuovo would receive confirmation of exactly what he suspected. The Emperor's trusted advisor had indeed fallen under an Englishwoman's spell. The Veterans Hospital celebration approached with alarming speed. Julia threw herself into preparation, coaching her students for their brief musical performance with single-minded determination. Each child understood the importance of the occasion. Their small school's future depended on impressing an emperor known more for martial values than educational vision. True to his word, Sebastian maintained professional distance. His letters arrived on official stationery, bearing the imperial seal and formal language that revealed nothing of the man who had stood in her sitting room speaking of hearts and duty. Only once did he depart from this pattern. A small volume of children's poetry arrived without note or explanation, though Julia recognized the sender in the carefully selected Austrian folk tales that would appeal to her students. 3 days before the ceremony, disaster struck. Friedrich Weber arrived unannounced, accompanied by an imperial auditor. Miss Lamont, Weber began with unconcealed satisfaction, discrepancies have been identified in your financial accounts. Pending investigation, the Emperor has ordered all imperial funding frozen. Julia stared at him in disbelief. That's impossible. Our accounts are meticulously maintained. Nevertheless, the auditor interjected, producing documents, these expenditures for musical instruments lack proper authorization. and these salary payments exceed the approved schedule. The allegations were absurd, every expense had been documented and approved. Yet Julia recognized the strategy immediately, creating sufficient doubt to justify suspending funds just before the emperor's visit, ensuring the school would appear mismanaged. "This is deliberate interference," she stated flatly. "I demand to speak with Herr Moreau." Weber's smile turned predatory. Herr Moreau has been temporarily relieved of oversight responsibilities regarding this project, pending investigation into his objectivity. The implication was clear: Sebastian himself was under scrutiny. Any intervention from him now would only confirm suspicions of improper influence. After they departed with her financial ledgers, Julia faced her staff with determined calm. "We will proceed as planned. The children have worked too hard to be denied their moment." That night, she wrote to Sebastian through unofficial channels, sending her letter via a sympathetic teacher whose brother served in the palace guard. She explained the situation without accusation or panic, concluding, "I will not allow political machinations to harm these children. We will perform as planned, with or without official blessing. Some causes transcend politics and protocol. This is one such cause. No response came. Julia didn't expect one. Sebastian could not risk further association while under scrutiny. She stood alone now, facing powerful opponents with nothing but her conviction and 23 children whose futures hung in the balance. The day of the ceremony dawned bright and clear. Julia dressed her students in their modest uniforms, rehearsed their performance one final time, and led them on foot to the Veterans Hospital where the imperial visit would take place. They arrived to chaos and confusion. The hospital administrator, previously supportive, now regarded Julia with obvious discomfort. "Miss Lamont, there's been a change in the program. The children's performance has been removed from the schedule." "By whose authority?" Julia demanded. Count Montalnovo personally revised the ceremony. He felt it would unnecessarily extend an already lengthy program. It was the final blow in a calculated campaign: first discredit the school's finances, then eliminate their opportunity to demonstrate their worth. Julia felt anger rise within her, not for herself but for the children who had worked so diligently, who now stood bewildered as their importance was casually dismissed. "Where is the ceremony taking place?" she asked, a plan forming in her mind. "The main courtyard, but Miss Lamont, I strongly advise against any disruption." She was already leading her students toward the courtyard, determination in every step. They would not be silenced so easily. The courtyard was filled with dignitaries and decorated veterans awaiting the emperor's arrival. Julia positioned her children near the entrance, instructing them in whispers to remain calm and follow her lead. When the imperial procession entered and the formal speeches began, she watched intently, searching the assembled officials for Sebastian. He stood 2 paces behind the emperor, his face impassive as he performed his duties with characteristic precision. Nothing in his demeanor betrayed any awareness of her presence or the crisis facing the school. Count Montalnovo spoke at length about sacrifice and imperial gratitude. As his speech concluded and polite applause rippled through the crowd, Julia seized her moment. Before the next speaker could begin, she stepped forward with her students. "Your Imperial Majesty," she called clearly, causing a ripple of shocked murmurs, "the children of your wounded veterans beg permission to honor their father's sacrifice through song." A scandalous breach of protocol, addressing the emperor directly without permission. The courtyard fell silent. Julia felt rather than saw Sebastian's attention snap to her, though he maintained his rigid posture. Emperor Franz Joseph regarded her with cold surprise, clearly recognizing her from their previous encounters. For a terrible moment, Julia thought she had miscalculated disastrously. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Empress Elizabeth leaned toward her husband, whispering something that made his stern expression soften marginally. "We will hear the children," the emperor declared, silencing Montalnovo's beginning protest with a raised hand. Julia nodded to her oldest student, who began a simple melody on a borrowed violin. The other children joined in song, a traditional Austrian folk tune celebrating resilience and hope. Their young voices filled the courtyard, pure and earnest as they sang for fathers who had given so much for the empire. As the performance concluded, Julia noticed something extraordinary. The emperor's eyes shone with emotion, and several veterans openly wept. Even Montenuovo seemed momentarily disarmed by the simple sincerity of the children's tribute. In the hushed moment following the final notes, Sebastian stepped forward. "Your Majesty, if I may," he said formally. "These children represent the future your brave veterans fought to secure. Their school provides not merely education but healing for families marked by war's consequences." It was a calculated risk, revealing his continued support despite the campaign against him. Julia held her breath as the Emperor considered his trusted advisor's words. "The children perform admirably," Franz Joseph acknowledged. "Their tribute honors our veterans appropriately." He turned to Montenuovo. "I understand there were concerns regarding the school's management." The Count bowed. "Financial irregularities, Your Majesty. Currently under investigation." "Indeed." The Emperor's gaze returned to Julia. "Miss Lamont, it seems you inspire both devoted support and suspicious scrutiny. A curious achievement for a schoolmistress." Julia curtsied deeply. "I serve the children, Your Majesty. They deserve every opportunity to become worthy citizens of your empire, regardless of their father's wounds." Something in her straightforward reply seemed to resonate with the Emperor. He studied her thoughtfully before pronouncing, "The audit will continue. If irregularities exist, they will be addressed. If they do not..." His gaze shifted meaningfully to Montenuovo. "Then perhaps our scrutiny has been misplaced." It wasn't a complete victory, but it offered hope. As the Imperial Party continued their tour, Sebastian managed to pass near Julia, murmuring without looking directly at her, "Midnight." The Stadtpark gazebo. The secret meeting place sent a thrill of anticipation through her, tempered by concern for the risk Sebastian took in arranging such an encounter. Whatever he planned to tell her, it must be significant enough to warrant the danger. As Julia led her students back to the school, she felt Friedrich Weber's cold gaze following her departure. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since the campaign against her began, she dared to hope they might emerge victorious. The night air carried the scent of late summer flowers as Julia made her way through the deserted Stadtpark, her heart pounding with each step toward the ornate gazebo at its center. The full moon illuminated the path, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. Sebastian waited within the gazebo, a dark silhouette against the moonlight. As she approached, he turned, relief evident in his posture. "You came," he said simply. "Did you doubt I would?" Julia stepped into the gazebo, maintaining a proper distance despite her desire to close the space between them. "Not your willingness," he clarified, "but your safety. Weber has people watching your apartment." The revelation sent a chill through her. "Then we are both taking considerable risks tonight." "Necessary risks." Sebastian moved closer, his expression grave. "The Emperor has ordered a complete review of the audit, conducted by his personal secretary, not Montenuovo's people. I believe the truth will emerge, but until then, you must proceed with extreme caution." "And you?" Julia asked, searching his face in the moonlight. "Your position remains precarious because of me." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Because of my own choices, Julia. I knew the potential consequences when I championed your cause." "Why did you?" The question had lingered unasked for too long. "From that first day, when the Emperor dismissed me so completely, why did you see something worth saving?" Sebastian was silent for a moment, his gaze drifting to the moonlit park beyond. "My brother died in service to the Empire," he finally said, the words coming with difficulty. "Not gloriously in battle, but slowly, painfully, from wounds that never properly healed. He left behind 2 sons who received medals commemorating their father's sacrifice, but no education to secure their future." Understanding dawned. "Your nephews were fortunate that I could provide for them," he confirmed. "Most veterans' children receive nothing but official condolences. When I read your proposal, I recognized the same understanding I had come to through personal loss, that honoring sacrifice means caring for those left behind." His voice softened. "But it was more than your idea that compelled me, Julia. It was your determination, your refusal to accept that something vital could be dismissed as worthless simply because it came from an unexpected source. The admission hung between them, freighted with meaning that transcended the specific circumstances of their meeting. Sebastian, Julia began, uncertain how to respond to this glimpse into his closely guarded heart. He shook his head, stepping closer still. I have maintained the propriety my position demands. I have placed duty above personal inclination at every turn. But tonight... His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Tonight I must speak truth, whatever the consequence. Julia's breath caught as he took her hand, his touch sending warmth coursing through her despite the night's chill. I have come to cherish you, Sebastian said simply. Your compassion, your courage, your unwavering commitment to what is right despite all opposition. These past months of enforced distance have been difficult. For me as well, Julia admitted, her voice unsteady. I've missed our conversations, your insight, your presence. His fingers tightened around hers. The Emperor's review will conclude within a fortnight. If, as I expect, the allegations are proven false, the school's funding will be restored. But more significantly, Montenuovo's influence may wane sufficiently to what? Julia asked when he hesitated. Sebastian's dark eyes held hers in the moonlight. To allow me to court you properly, should you permit it? The declaration, so formal yet so heartfelt, left Julia momentarily speechless. When she found her voice, it emerged with quiet certainty, I would permit it gladly. For the first time in their acquaintance, Sebastian's carefully maintained reserve cracked completely. Joy transformed his features as he raised her hand to his lips in a gesture that honored propriety while suggesting deeper emotions held carefully in check. Then we must ensure your school survives this challenge, he said, reluctantly releasing her hand. Return home now, and trust that matters are progressing favorably behind the scenes. The Empress herself has taken interest in Montenuovo's vendetta. As they prepared to part, Sebastian handed her a small package wrapped in plain paper. For difficult moments, when the outcome seems uncertain. Later, alone in her apartment, Julia unwrapped the gift to find a silver locket containing a miniature portrait, not of Sebastian, which would have been inappropriate, but of a view of Vienna's skyline as seen from the Heldenplatz where they had first walked together. The message was clear: remember where this journey began, and have faith in where it might lead. Unbeknownst to either Julia or Sebastian, their midnight meeting had indeed been observed, not by Weber's spies, but by a quiet figure who had followed Sebastian from the palace. The Empress Elizabeth, known for her nocturnal walks when sleep eluded her, had witnessed their encounter from a distance. Rather than reporting this breach of protocol, she smiled to herself, pleased to see that her intuition about the connection between the dedicated schoolmistress and the serious advisor had proven correct. As she returned to the palace, the Empress began composing in her mind the words she would speak to her husband, words that might help him see the value in allowing a worthy love to flourish alongside a worthy cause. The Imperial Review concluded more swiftly than anticipated. One crisp September morning, Julia arrived at the school to find Sebastian waiting on the steps, his expression carefully neutral though his eyes conveyed suppressed excitement. Herr Moreau, she greeted him formally, aware of teachers and students arriving around them. This is unexpected. Miss Lamont. He bowed slightly. I come with official news regarding your institution status. Inside her office, with the door safely closed, his formality melted away. The review is complete. The alleged financial discrepancies were proven to be deliberate misrepresentations. Weber himself altered documents before presenting them to the auditor. Julia gasped. He falsified evidence? That's criminal. Indeed. He has been removed from his position and faces potential prosecution. Sebastian's satisfaction was evident. More importantly, the Emperor has not only restored your funding but increased it by 15% as compensation for the disruption. Relief flooded through her. And Montenuovo retains his position but has lost considerable influence. The Emperor was most displeased to discover his trusted advisor had been targeted with manufactured evidence. A smile touched Sebastian's lips. It seems His Majesty has developed unexpected appreciation for your work, and for those who recognized its value from the beginning. The implication was clear: Sebastian's judgment had been vindicated, his position strengthened rather than damaged by the ordeal. I'm relieved beyond words, Julia said softly. For the school, of course, but also for you. I couldn't bear thinking I had caused damage to your standing. On the contrary. Sebastian moved closer, his voice lowering. The Emperor spoke personally with the Emperor regarding this matter. She suggested that my recognition of the school's value demonstrated precisely the insight he values in an advisor, seeing potential where others see only problems. Julia's heart quickened at his proximity. The Emperor seems remarkably perceptive. More than either of us realized, Sebastian agreed with a soft laugh. In fact, she made another suggestion to the Emperor, one concerning my personal affairs rather than state matters. Before Julia could inquire further, a knock interrupted them. The school secretary entered with an envelope bearing the imperial seal. This just arrived by special messenger, she explained. Marked urgent. When they were alone again, Sebastian gestured to the envelope. Open it. With trembling fingers, Julia broke the seal and unfolded the heavy parchment within. Her eyes widened as she read. An invitation to the Autumn Palace reception, she breathed. For me personally, not as the school's representative. At the Empress's specific request, Sebastian confirmed. She wishes to introduce you to certain educational reformers from across Europe who will be in attendance. His expression grew tender. It also provides the perfect opportunity for me to begin courting you openly, with imperial approval. The significance of this development left Julia momentarily speechless. From worthless petitioner to imperial guest in less than a year, a transformation that reflected not just her own persistence but Sebastian's unwavering belief in her vision. There's more, Sebastian said, reaching into his coat. He withdrew an official document and placed it before her. The Emperor has created a new position within the Ministry of Education, Director of Veterans Family Services. The appointee will oversee the expansion of your educational model to other regions of the Empire. Julia scanned the document, her astonishment growing. And who will hold this position? That depends, Sebastian replied, an uncharacteristic hint of nervousness entering his voice. The Emperor has approved my recommendation, but the candidate must accept. Comprehension dawned slowly. You're offering me an imperial appointment. Me, a foreign woman with no noble title or connections. I'm offering you the opportunity to extend your vision throughout the Empire, Sebastian corrected gently. And yes, it would mean working closely with various ministries, including my own. The implications were momentous, not just professional advancement, but a legitimate place within the imperial structure that would make their relationship far less controversial. This is overwhelming, Julia admitted, trying to absorb the sudden shift in her circumstances. You need not decide immediately, Sebastian assured her. Though I admit to personal interest in your acceptance. His gaze held hers with newfound openness. Working together would allow us to build something meaningful for the Empire while exploring what might develop between us. The careful phrasing, proper yet heartfelt, perfectly captured the man she had come to admire so deeply. Julia rose from her desk, moving to stand before him. I accept, she said simply. Both the position and the implied invitation to allow our acquaintance to deepen. Joy transformed Sebastian's austere features. With gentle deliberation, he took her hand and raised it to his lips, a gesture that honored propriety while suggesting the deeper emotions that had flourished despite every obstacle. The Emperor once called you worthless, he said softly. Yet you have proven your weight in gold through perseverance and compassion. I saw it from the beginning, but now others see it too, including those with power to change lives throughout the Empire. As autumn sunlight streamed through the office windows, illuminating dust motes that danced between them like tiny stars, Julia and Sebastian stood on the threshold of a future neither could have imagined when first they met, a future where worthiness was measured not by birth or title, but by the capacity of the heart to recognize value where others saw none. In the classroom beyond, children's voices rose in song, the same Austrian folk melody they had performed for the Emperor, a simple tune about hope emerging from darkness. It seemed a fitting accompaniment to this moment of quiet triumph, this recognition that sometimes the most valuable treasures lie hidden until someone cares enough to look beneath the surface and discover the golden heart waiting to be found.